The hills of Derbyshire rolled out beneath a pale gray sky, soft and shapeless under a thin veil of mist. The world here seemed to breathe slower, as if the valley itself had forgotten the rush of time. Long ago, in the middle of the 14th century, when the Black Death was clawing through Europe, there stood a small village nestled between these hills. It wasn't marked on many maps, and even travelers often passed it by, their eyes fixed on distant roads. The cottages were crooked but warm, built of stone gathered from the nearby fields. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimneys, carrying the smell of peat and damp straw. The place felt like a whisper in the wind, a quiet corner of a world that had gone mad. Life here followed its own slow rhythm. The roosters crowed too early, the dogs barked at nothing, and the farmers walked the same paths their fathers had walked before them. Time in this valley was circular. Each sunrise repeated the last, and each sunset promised another day exactly like the one before. The villagers had grown used to the sameness, and in that routine they found safety. Beyond the hills, people spoke of a sickness that came like a shadow. They said it emptied whole towns in a week, turning laughter into silence, turning streets into graveyards. But the villagers here listened only faintly, as though hearing a story told from another world. There were no doctors, no priests left who dared to visit from the cities. Letters came rarely, and when they did, they arrived already smudged and damp from the rain. The news carried with them a kind of dread that settled like fog in the heart. Some said the plague came from the east. Others said it was a punishment from heaven, a cleansing of sin. But in this small village, such ideas floated away with the smoke. The people here did not have the time or energy to wonder why death had come. They only wondered why it had not come yet. The village itself looked almost ordinary. Narrow dirt paths winding between cottages, fields divided by low stone walls, a small stream curling gently along the edge of the pastures. But there was something unspoken in the air, a sense that the village was holding its breath. Mothers kept their children close, and the older men spoke less than before. The wind carried whispers from far-off places, the tolling of bells for the dead, the sound of cartwheels carrying bodies away. The villagers pretended not to hear. They told themselves that as long as they kept working, as long as they kept the fire burning, the sickness could not find them here at night when the world turned quiet. The hills became silhouettes against a sky scattered with cold stars. The air was heavy with moisture, and sometimes the only sound was the dripping of water from the eaves. In those hours, the people of the village prayed softly, not in churches, but in their homes, kneeling by candlelight. Their prayers were simple, almost sleepy, for the cows to stay healthy, for the bread to rise, for the children to wake again in the morning. In that simplicity was their strength. Fear was something they had no room for. They could not afford it. The world beyond their valley was crumbling, yet here, the rhythm of life continued. The blacksmith still worked his forge, the baker still kneaded his dough, and the shepherd still called. Morning came softly to the village, the pale light spilling through the cracks of old shutters and drifting across wooden floors. The sound of the stream murmured in the distance, and the smell of damp hay mixed with the smoke of hearth fires. The people of the village woke, not with alarm, but with habit. Life here was built on repetition, a pattern of days stitched together by simple tasks and quiet endurance. Every morning began with the same sound, the gentle clatter of buckets at the well, the creak of doors opening, and the soft murmur of greetings exchanged in half-asleep voices. Nothing rushed, nothing changed. In the fields, farmers moved like slow shadows through the mist. Their boots sank slightly into the wet earth, and their breath rose in faint clouds before fading into the cool air. The rhythm of their work was steady, unbroken by talk or song. They tilled the soil as their fathers had, guided more by memory than by thought. In this place, time did not push forward. It drifted, lazy and Somewhere beyond the hills, chaos reigned. Cities burned their dead, bells tolled without pause, and travelers told stories of streets emptied by fear. But here, the world was small enough to stay still. The women worked near the cottages, washing linens in the stream or hanging herbs to dry above the fire. Their hands moved with quiet precision, shaped by years of repetition. A pot simmered over the hearth, filling the air with the scent of onions and broth. Outside, a few children played in the dirt, their laughter soft and short-lived, never too loud, as if even joy feared to draw attention. The village cat wound between doorways, tail flicking, eyes half closed. Even the animals seemed to understand the unspoken rule of this place. Move gently, disturb nothing, let the world remain as it is. At midday, the sun appeared weakly through the clouds, its light thin but welcome. The villagers gathered for a meal of bread, cheese, and whatever the earth had offered that week. There was comfort in simplicity. They didn't speak much, but when they did, their words were kind, practical, and short. The sheep need mending. The roof leaks again. There's talk from the next town, but we're fine here. The words themselves were like tools, used only when needed, then set aside. Silence was their truest language. By afternoon, the fields were golden with light. The blacksmith's hammer rang slowly in the distance, each strike a heartbeat that echoed across the valley. The baker, covered in flour, set loaves along the window to cool, and the smell drifted down the lane. A pair of boys fetched water, stopping to skim stones across the surface of the stream. Everything in the village existed in balance, people, earth, and time itself, all moving in the same quiet pattern. They did not know that this rhythm was their greatest protection. The plague thrived on movement, on the panic of crowds, on fleeing bodies and shared roads. But here, nothing moved fast enough for death to find its way in. When dusk arrived, the villagers finished their work and gathered their tools. The air grew cooler, and the mist returned, softening the edges of everything. Cows were led into barns, and candles flickered in cottage windows. The same prayer. There were days when the wind came down from the north, curling through the trees and brushing against the roofs of the cottages with a faint sigh. On those days, the villagers felt uneasy, though they could not have said why. It was not the cold that troubled them. They were used to that, but something carried within the wind itself. Faint sounds, distant voices, or maybe only imagination. The older folk would pause in their work and stare toward the horizon, as though listening for something only they could hear. The air, once gentle and familiar, began to feel like a messenger, bringing tidings from a world they no longer wished to remember. Once or twice a season, a traveler would appear on the dirt road that wound through the valley. They came slowly, wrapped in cloaks of dust and fatigue, The villagers always watched from a distance, their faces unreadable. They did not greet these wanderers with anger, but with silence, an old, heavy silence that felt safer than words. The travelers, sensing it, rarely stayed. They drank water from the stream, rested under the trees, and moved on by dusk. Yet, in the short time they lingered, they left behind fragments of a darker story. They spoke of whole towns gone quiet, of doors nailed shut, of prayers whispered to empty skies. They told of the plague moving like smoke, invisible and relentless. The villagers listened, but not too closely. They had learned that listening too much to the world could unsettle the soul. Fear, like disease, had a way of spreading, and so they chose ignorance as their shield. To them, the sickness was a faraway curse, something that existed only in other people's stories. Here, in their quiet valley, life continued. The cows still gave milk, the bread still rose, the stream still whispered the same song it had whispered for centuries. If death wished to come, it would have to find its way through layers of calm so thick. Even the wind seemed to move slower. Still, when the wind shifted, bringing with it a faint smell of smoke or decay, the villagers would retreat indoors. Windows were shut tight, and herbs were burned in small clay bowls, rosemary, sage, and lavender, to cleanse the air. The smell filled every home, mixing with the warmth of the fires and the soft creak of wood. The children asked why they burned the herbs, and the mothers only said it was for safety, though few could explain how. Rituals had become their comfort. Each act, the lighting of candles, the whisper of prayers, the closing of doors, was a small defiance against an invisible enemy at night. The wind grew softer, and the village returned to its familiar rhythm. The dogs curled near the hearths, their ears twitching at sounds too faint for human hearing. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, slow and hollow. The people of the village lay in their beds, listening to the wind press against the shutters. It was a reminder that the world outside still existed, broken, frightened, and restless, while here everything remained suspended in the same gentle stillness. They did not know whether the plague would ever come. They only knew that, for now, it hadn't. The next morning, the wind changed again, carrying only the scent of rain and wet earth. The villagers stepped outside, blinking against the pale light. The hills glistened faintly with dew, and the sound of the stream returned. At the edge of the village, where the land dipped into a quiet hollow of moss and ferns, there was a spring. It was small, no wider than a wagon wheel, yet it seemed to hold a presence far greater than its size. The water bubbled softly from beneath a bed of smooth stones, so clear that one could see the pebbles glittering like pale coins beneath the surface. The villagers called it the heart of the earth. No one remembered when they first began to drink from it, only that it had always been there, flowing with calm persistence, even in the coldest winters. Some said it was blessed, others said it was protected. Whatever it was, the people believed it kept them safe every morning. Before the sun climbed fully over the hills, a few villagers would gather by the spring. They carried wooden cups, their breath forming misty clouds in the chill air. They didn't speak much, only nodded to one another and listened to the sound of the water. Each person took a sip in silence, then poured a little back into the earth, an offering of gratitude, or perhaps a quiet bargain. The routine was old, older than memory, passed down without explanation. It was not religion, exactly, nor superstition. It was something in between, a rhythm of faith born from the need to feel that the world still held kindness as the Black Death swept through towns and cities beyond the hills. Rumors grew that the spring was magic. A traveler once claimed that the water was touched by silver veins deep in the ground, giving it healing power. Another said the stones beneath it were sacred, laid there by monks long ago. But the villagers didn't care for stories. They didn't try to explain what they already understood in their bones. The spring was life. To question it would be to break the fragile calm that held their world together. And so they tended to it gently, clearing fallen leaves, stacking new stones when the walls began to crumble. It became both a ritual and a reminder that even in times of death, there could still be something pure, untouched. And steady children grew up hearing the sound of that spring before they learned to walk. They played near it, tossing pebbles into its ripples and watching the rings widen until they disappeared. Mothers washed their hands there after tending the sick animals, whispering hopes that the same water would wash away sickness from their homes. The spring was woven into every part of life: weddings, births, even farewells. When someone died, a small jug of the water was placed near their resting place, so their spirit could drink one last time before leaving the earth. It was a gesture, both tender and practical, a symbol of continuity in a time of endings. Years later, scholars would study the story of this village and wonder why it had survived when so many others fell. They would write papers and arguments, debating minerals and microbes, tracing invisible patterns through history. But none of their explanations could capture what truly kept this place alive. Not the water itself, but the stillness it created. The villagers had built their lives around that calm, trusting it more than reason. The spring taught them patience, and patience became their shield. At dusk, when the day ended and the mist returned to the fields, the spring still whispered softly in the dark. The villagers passed by it on their way home, glancing toward its shimmering surface as they carried their lanterns back to their cottages. The sound of the water mixed with the sigh of the evening wind. The last light of evening always seemed to linger longer over the valley, as though even the sun refused to leave this quiet place. The air grew cool and blue, carrying with it the smell of wet grass and woods. Windows glowed faintly, each one a flicker of warmth against the approaching dark. The villagers finished their simple suppers, bread and stew, and moved through their small cottages with the easy rhythm of people who had done the same thing every night of their lives. Outside, the hills were hushed. The fields shimmered faintly beneath the pale wash of moonlight, and the world seemed to settle into its usual sleep. But that night, and every night that followed, something different stirred in the silence. Not fear, but awareness, as if the village itself was awake and listening. When the first wave of the plague had swept through England, death had moved like fire, devouring towns in a matter of weeks. Bells had tolled endlessly, wagons had filled the streets, and families had vanished overnight. Yet this valley had remained untouched. Some said the winds that carried sickness could not find their way past the hills. Others said it was the spring's protection, or the prayers whispered by generations before them. The villagers themselves did not wonder too deeply. They only knew that they were still alive, and that was enough. Still, as the nights grew longer and the silence thicker, a strange heaviness filled the air, not dread, but something gentler, like the hush before a snowfall. On one such night, the blacksmith sat outside his forge, staring into the glowing embers that refused to die. He listened to the crackle of the fire and the soft rustle of the wind. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its voice slow and hollow. The blacksmith thought about the world beyond the valley, the cities he had once dreamed of visiting, now empty. He wondered how many others were left, breathing under the same moon, whispering the same prayers. The thought made him feel small, but not afraid. There was comfort in the idea that his world was only as wide as the sound of the stream, the shape of the hills, and the laughter of the few souls who still walked these quiet paths inside the cottages. Mothers tucked their children into beds stuffed with straw and herbs. They told them the same bedtime stories their own mothers had told, tales of brave knights, wandering spirits, and faraway kings. The children listened with half-closed eyes, the flickering firelight painting soft shadows on the walls. For them, the world outside the valley had never really existed. Their world was this: the warmth of the hearth, the steady breathing of their parents, the distant hum of the spring, and the endless, comforting stillness. Outside, the plague raged unseen, but inside, there was only peace. By midnight, the village was asleep. The mist crept back in, wrapping around every roof and tree like a gentle blanket. The stars shimmered faintly through the haze, their reflections trembling in puddles along the path. Even the wind seemed to move carefully, unwilling to disturb what the villagers had built a sanctuary of slowness in a world that had forgotten how to rest. In that fragile stillness lay their greatest secret. It was not luck nor divine favor, but the simple art of staying still. They had survived because they had chosen not to run, not to fight, but to wait. And so the night went on, endless and soft. The fires burned low, the water whispered beneath the moon, and the hills stood guard in silence. History would remember this village as a miracle, a mystery that defied the plague. But within its quiet heart, no one thought of miracles. They only slept, as they always had, while the rest of the world forgot how. When the spring of the following year arrived, the hills woke before the people did. Dew lay thick upon the grass, shining like small pieces of glass in the first light. The air was lighter now, washed clean by winter rain, carrying the scent of earth and new growth. Slowly, life began to stretch its limbs. Seeds pushed through the soil, the river swelled with meltwater, and the sparrows returned to the eaves of the cottages. For the first time in months, laughter was heard in the valley, not loud or careless, but gentle, as though the villagers were afraid to disturb their own happiness. The plague, it seemed, had passed them by completely, leaving only the faint echo of stories from beyond the hills. The villagers moved carefully through these new days, as if the world might still break if touched too quickly. They cleaned the stone paths, repaired roofs, and opened windows that had been shut for too long. The smell of fresh bread returned to the air, mixed with the sharper scent of iron from the blacksmith's forge. Each familiar sound, a dog barking, a child calling, a wheel turning, was a kind of proof that life still existed. But beneath this quiet revival, there was a strange gentleness, as though everyone had learned something they could not explain. They no longer took the ordinary for granted. The simple act of breathing the morning air felt sacred. Once a week, a few of the younger men would climb to the ridge above the village and look out toward the distant valleys. From there, they could see faint trails of smoke, the remains of towns that had not been so lucky. Sometimes they thought of traveling, of seeing what was left of the greater world, but the thought faded as quickly as it came. The valley was enough. The hills stood like walls around them, keeping both fear and temptation at bay. Even the wind seemed gentler here, as if softened by mercy. The outside world was recovering, but this place had never needed to dot down by the spring. The women still gathered in the mornings, their reflections rippling across the clear surface. They spoke of the new crops, of weddings planned for summer, of babies born in the quiet winter. The children listened, not understanding the weight of what had passed, only sensing that their mother's laughter had changed, slower, deeper, edged with gratitude. The water, cool and constant, flowed on as it always had, unaware that it had become the center of so many quiet hopes. To the villagers, it was no longer just protection. It was memory, a reminder of all that had not been lost at night. When the mist returned, the village took on its dreamlike shape once more. Lanterns glowed in doorways, smoke drifted upward in lazy curls, and the sound of crickets filled the still air. Sometimes, an old man would sit outside and speak to the darkness, telling stories of the time before the sickness, of fairs and markets, of ships that came from distant lands. The children listened wide-eyed, as if he were describing another planet. To them, the world had always been this quiet. The great cities, the noise, the chaos, all were myths of another age. And perhaps, in a way, they were. The night sky stretched endlessly above the valley, glittering with more stars than seemed possible. The villagers slept beneath it without fear now, their dreams filled with fields and rain and the soft hum of life returning. The plague had taken so much from the world, but from this small, forgotten place, it had taken nothing. In their stillness, they had survived. In their patience, as spring melted gently into summer, the rhythm of the valley deepened once more. The fields, long left untouched during the months of silence, began to breathe under the hands of the farmers. They sowed seeds carefully, almost reverently, pressing each one into the dark, damp soil as if planting hope itself. The sound of shovels and rakes broke the long quiet, blending with the soft hum of bees drifting lazily through the meadows. The land responded kindly, welcoming their patience. Grass grew thicker, wheat pushed upward in perfect lines, and the air filled with the scent of wildflowers and sunlight. For the villagers, the slow return of work felt like waking from a deep, dreamless sleep. Each day began the same way. A low bell sounded from the chapel, its tone rich and unhurried, calling people to their daily labors. Men went to the fields, women to their looms or their gardens, and children carried water from the spring. It was ordinary life, yet every motion carried the weight of something sacred. They were rebuilding not just their homes, but their trust in the world. After months of fear, even the smallest task seemed a gift. The rhythm of labor, the creak of wooden wheels, the soft slap of wet laundry against stone. These were the songs of a world rediscovering its balance at midday. When the sun stood high and golden above the valley, people gathered under the shade of the old oak that stood near the well. They shared bread, cheese, and laughter that sounded strange and beautiful, like a language they had forgotten how to speak. An old woman told a story of her youth, of markets crowded with color and sound, of musicians who played by the river. The younger villagers listened as though she were describing another century. It was strange to think that the world beyond had once been so loud. Here, the silence had become part of their blood, not empty silence, but a living one, filled with birdsong and the steady pulse of the earth. A traveling monk appeared at the edge of the valley. His robe was torn, and his sandals were heavy with dust. The villagers watched from afar, uncertain. He was the first outsider they had seen in nearly a year. When he reached the spring, he knelt to drink, his reflection trembling in the water. The people approached him slowly, their curiosity stronger than their caution. The monk spoke softly, telling them of the world beyond the hills, of cities that had begun to rebuild, of churches ringing their bells again, of survivors returning to their fields. He said he had heard stories of a village that the plague had never touched, a place of peace hidden in the folds of England. When the villagers told him he had found it, he wept quietly, his tears falling into the sacred water. That evening, the monk prayed with them. His voice rose gently in the air, mingling with the hum of crickets and the faint sigh of the wind for the villagers. It was the first time in months that they heard words spoken in Latin, old and distant, yet strangely comforting. It felt as though the past had returned not to haunt them, but to bless them. The monk stayed only one night. In the morning, he left before sunrise, leaving behind By the time summer reached its height, the village had settled into a peace that felt almost ancient. The days were long and golden, the air thick with the smell of cut hay and wild thyme. Children ran barefoot through the grass, chasing dragonflies that glowed like tiny sparks in the sunlight. Their laughter drifted across the fields, soft and distant, fading into the hum of bees. For the elders, this sound was both joy and reminder, proof that life, no matter how fragile, had found its rhythm again. The plague had taught them many things, though not in words. It had taught them that stillness was not the same as fear, to stop running, to breathe, to stay. These were the quiet lessons that saved them in the evenings. As the sun sank behind the hills, the villagers gathered near the stream. The air cooled, turning soft and blue, and the reflection of the sky rippled gently on the water's surface. There was little talk, only the comfortable silence shared by people who no longer needed words to understand each other. Someone would hum a tune, an old melody, without a name, and soon others would join in, their voices low and slow, like wind moving through reeds. The song never had a beginning or an end. It simply drifted the way time drifted in the valley. It wasn't about remembering or forgetting. It was about being quietly, presently, together. Every household kept its own rhythm, but each one moved in harmony with the others. The blacksmith's hammer marked the pulse of the day. The ringing of his anvil told the children when it was time to head home. The baker's fire became the village clock, its smoke curling upward in steady intervals. Even the animals seemed to understand the pattern. The cows returned to the barns at the same hour each evening, and the dogs barked softly at the same shadows every night. It was a kind of music, a rhythm built not from noise, but from the patient repetition of small, good things as harvest approached. The villagers prepared together, working side by side from dawn until twilight. There were no leaders, No overseers, only shared effort, guided by memory and instinct. When one farmer grew tired, another took his place. When a child stumbled, a hand was always there to lift them up. They had learned that survival was not about strength, but about community. Alone, none of them could have endured the uncertainty of the plague years. But together, they had found calm, not by fighting death, but by embracing life in all its slow, ordinary beauty. Sometimes, in the late hours of night, a few of the elders would gather outside, sitting on the low stone wall near the spring. They would speak softly of the world before, of crowded markets, of noisy taverns, of roads filled with merchants and travelers. But even as they spoke, they knew they would not trade their quiet lives for the old noise. The silence had become a companion. The world beyond the valley might rebuild itself with stone and fire. But here they rebuilt themselves with patience and peace. It was a different kind of strength. The first whisper of autumn came not with wind, but with light. The sun began to soften, its gold turning to amber, its warmth more tender than fierce. Shadows grew longer across the fields, and the hum of summer faded into the low, steady rhythm of harvest. In the valley, the air was filled with the dry rustle of wheat, the scent of earth and firewood, and the faint sweetness of ripening apples. The villagers rose earlier now, their breath fogging in the cool dawn. The season of gathering had begun. For months, they had tended the land with quiet devotion, and now it answered them with abundance. The fields shone like rivers of gold, each stalk heavy with grain. Men and women worked side by side, their movements slow and steady, the swish of sickles blending with the soft murmur of the wind. There was no hurry here. Every motion was part of a rhythm older than memory, a rhythm of patience, gratitude, and return. They did not speak much, for the work itself was a kind of prayer. The steady cut of the blade, the rustle of falling stalks, the sweep of hands gathering bundles. Each sound seemed to honor the simple truth that they had lived to see another season. When midday came, they rested in the shade of the old oak, sharing food and quiet laughter. Someone would always bring honey, thick and golden, to spread on rough bread. The children ran among the haystacks, their laughter echoing across the valley like the songs of birds. Above them, the sky stretched endlessly blue, a wide and forgiving canvas. For a moment, it seemed that the world had forgotten what it meant. The villagers did not speak of the plague anymore. They did not need to. Their silence was its own remembrance, gentle, unspoken, complete dot. The light spilled through the wheat in molten waves, painting every face with warmth. The blacksmith stood by his forge, watching the glow of the coals mirror the sunset. The old woman who baked bread each morning leaned against her doorway, her hands dusted with flour, her eyes reflecting the same deep peace. Children fell asleep where they sat, the smell of straw and smoke mingling in their dreams. The harvest was not just about food. It was about proof that life continued, that time could heal what fear had broken. That night, when the work was done, the villagers gathered near the spring. They lit small lanterns and placed them on the water, one by one, watching as they drifted slowly down the stream. The reflections shimmered like floating stars, the current carrying them gently out of sight. No one spoke, but everyone understood the meaning. Each light was a silent offering to the dead, to the living, to the strange mercy that had spared them. The soft glow of the lanterns painted the faces around the spring with gold and shadow, and for a moment, the whole valley seemed to breathe as one. By the time the last lantern disappeared into the darkness, the air had cooled to silver. The moon rose, pale and wide, and the village settled into sleep. The fields whispered under the night wind, the barns creaked softly, and the sound of the stream folded everything into its gentle rhythm. It was a harvest of silence, not the silence of emptiness, but of peace, the kind that comes after. The first frost of autumn came softly, as if afraid to disturb the peace. It settled on the grass like a thin veil of silver, catching the early light and turning the valley into a dream. Smoke curled from cottage chimneys in lazy ribbons, carrying the scent of pine and bread. The world for a moment felt weightless, suspended between one breath and the next. The harvest was over, the fields were bare again, and the village rested in its quiet glory. It was a time to pause, to look inward, to remember without sorrow. The villagers had lived through another year, untouched by sickness, and the weight of that miracle had begun to soften. The fear that once haunted them was now only a faint echo, replaced by something quieter and deeper: gratitude. Each morning, the bell in the chapel tower rang once, its sound rolling through the mist like a memory returning home. It had not been rung during the plague years, when so many other bells had tolled for death. Now it rang for life. The tone was low, slow, and steady, a heartbeat for the valley. Every time it sounded, people paused, not out of duty, but reverence. Inside the chapel, the air was cool and smelled faintly of beeswax and cedar. Sunlight spilled through the small stained glass windows, painting soft colors on the stone floor. The priest, an old man whose voice trembled like a leaf in the wind, spoke of endurance and grace. He did not preach of punishment or fear. Those were ideas that no longer belonged here. Instead, he spoke of patience, of the quiet faith that comes not from miracles, but from the will to keep tending the fire. Outside, the villagers listened even if they did not understand every word. Faith, like everything else in the valley, had become simpler. It was in the bread they baked, the water they carried, the care they gave to one another. After the service, people lingered outside the chapel. The children played near the steps, tossing handfuls of frost into the air, watching them shimmer like snow. The blacksmith laughed with the baker about the coming winter, while the women planned which families would share firewood. There was no rush to leave. The moment itself felt like enough. Around them, the hills rose silent and steady, the same as they had been for generations. To the villagers, it felt as though time itself had slowed to match their pace, patient, gentle, eternal. As night fell, the valley took on its old, familiar calm. The moon climbed over the ridges, washing everything in pale silver. The stream whispered softly in the dark, carrying faint reflections of starlight. Inside their homes, families sat close to the hearth, telling stories in voices just above a whisper. Some spoke of the plague as a warning, others as a mystery, but most spoke only of life, of crops and weather, of bread and laughter, of the simple grace of another ordinary day before sleep. The bell rang one final time, its sound drifting through the cold night air. It echoed off the hills and faded slowly into silence. The people listened from their beds, the familiar note filling them with warmth. It was not a call, nor a farewell. It was a promise that the world, quiet and small as it was, would keep turning. That morning would come again, gentle and golden, and the valley would wake once more beneath the same forgiving sky. The village that the plague had missed continued to live, not in fear or pride, but in peace. Its secret was never hidden in it. The first snow came without warning. One evening, the air thickened, soft and heavy, and by dawn, the entire valley lay beneath a blanket of white. Roofs, fences, and fields disappeared into the hush of it. The sound of the stream was faint now, muffled beneath ice, and even the birds seemed to have gone still. The world, for a moment, felt like it had stopped breathing. But inside the cottages, warmth glowed from every hearth. Firelight flickered against stone walls, and the smell of smoke and bread filled the air. The long winter had begun, and with it, a season of deep, peaceful rest. The villagers knew how to move slowly through these months. They had gathered enough grain, dried fruit, and salted meat to last until spring. Each family worked carefully, never wasting more than they needed. The days were shorter now, the light fading early, and so they learned to live by the rhythm of the fire. In the mornings, they rose before sunrise, wrapped in thick wool, their breath pale in the cold air. The men would tend to the animals, brushing snow from the barn doors, their boots crunching softly in the frost. The women would stir porridge over the flames, humming old songs that made the house feel even warmer. It was a quiet life, but a good one. By midday, the village was hushed except for the faint sound of chopping wood and laughter echoing from the hills. The children, untouched by the solemnity of winter, built forts from snow and chased each other through the drifts. Their shouts rang bright and clear in the cold air, carrying all the way to the stream. For the elders watching from their windows, the sight filled them with both joy and memory. They remembered other winters, the dark years, when silence meant fear. But this silence was different. It was the sound of safety, of life continuing, softly but steadily. Inside, time moved at a slower pace. The blacksmith no longer worked his forge, but repaired tools by the fire, his hands steady and calm. The baker experimented with herbs, adding lavender and honey to her loaves. The priest spent his evenings copying verses onto scraps of parchment, his writing small and careful. Each found comfort in their routines, small acts that kept the world turning, even as snow covered everything outside. At night, families gathered around their fires and told stories that had been told for centuries, of saints, of lost travelers, of stars that could guide the lost home. These were not stories of fear, but of endurance. Sometimes, when the night was especially quiet, one could hear the faint ring of the chapel bell carried through the still air. Its tone was soft, distant, like a dream that refused to fade. It reminded the people that they were not forgotten, not by time, nor by the world beyond the hills. And though no traveler had come since autumn, the villagers never felt alone. They had one another, their fires, their fields beneath the snow. The valley, wrapped in white silence, was a cradle holding them gently, waiting for the thaw. As the firelight dimmed each evening, the snow outside reflected the moon's pale glow, filling every window with quiet silver. Sleep came easily then. The villagers would drift off to the sound of crackling wood and the soft sigh of the wind moving through the chimneys. In dreams, they wandered their summer fields again, barefoot under the sun. And when morning came, they woke to the same calm stillness, a reminder that peace, once found, could last even through the coldest of winters. By midwinter, the days had grown as short as a sigh. The sun rose late, pale and tired, lingering low above the hills before slipping away again. Darkness filled most of the hours, but it was not an unwelcome darkness. The villagers had learned to live with it, even to love it. The night brought warmth and closeness, firelight flickering against faces, shadows dancing gently on stone walls. Inside their cottages, families sat together, the quiet hum of their lives blending with the low crackle of the hearth. The snow outside had grown thick and still. Paths disappeared overnight, fences vanished under drifts, and even the stream had fallen silent beneath a crust of ice. When the wind blew, it moved like a whisper through the valley, brushing against shutters and rooftops, as though checking that all were safe. The world beyond the hills was frozen, unknown, unreachable, but that did not trouble anyone here. The village had everything it needed: food, warmth, and each other. For the first time in memory, survival no longer meant struggle. It meant stillness. Each evening, when the sky turned violet and the first star appeared, the people gathered in small circles. In one cottage, the blacksmith would play a simple tune on a wooden flute. Its melody was low and steady, like a lullaby written by the wind itself. In another, the baker's children would perform a play made from old stories, kings and knights and brave travelers, all played with laughter and candlelight. The priest sometimes visited, carrying a single candle from house to house, blessing each doorway with quiet words. It was not ceremony, it was comfort. The flame was passed gently, hand to hand, a small reminder that even in the longest night, light would always find its way through. The women kept themselves busy with sewing, mending what the summer had worn down. They stitched old fabrics into quilts, each piece a fragment of memory, a bit of a father's cloak, a child's old sleeve, a mother's shawl. When the quilts were done, they lay them across the beds, heavy and warm, stitched with the patience of love. The men carved wood spoons, toys, tools, the sound of knives against grain, sharp but soothing in the quiet. Even the smallest act had meaning now. Winter, they had learned, was not a time of waiting, but of remembering. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the faint light from the cottages. The village looked almost unreal, like a painting half-dreamed. The smoke from chimneys rose straight into the sky, silver and soft. From a distance, one might have thought no life existed there at all, only stillness. But inside, the fires glowed, and the people breathed, and the world turned slowly in its sleep when the longest night finally arrived. They marked it not with fear, but gratitude. The chapel bell rang once, its note deep and calm. The villagers gathered by the spring, now frozen in glassy silence, and placed pine branches and small candles along its edge. The flames wavered faintly in the cold air, their reflections shimmering on the ice. They stood together for a long time, saying nothing, watching the light tremble but never go out. By midnight, the stars had filled the sky, bright, endless, ancient. The people returned to their homes, their breath rising like mist in the cold. As they slept, the snow kept falling, wrapping the village in silence deeper than any sound. The longest night, the heart of winter, was a quiet spell, a time when the snow grew thick, The air hung still, and the world seemed to listen more than it spoke. Days blended into nights, and the line between waking and dreaming became thin as mist. Inside their cottages, the villagers gathered close to the hearth, where firelight shimmered like liquid gold. The walls glowed warm against the endless white outside. Every sound, the creak of wood, the crackle of flame, the soft murmur of voices, felt magnified, as if the whole valley was leaning in to hear. On nights like these, stories became their warmth. The oldest woman in the village, her hair silver and her eyes like pale embers, was known simply as Nan. She had lived through more winters than anyone could count, and her voice, though thin, carried the kind of weight only time could give. Children sat cross-legged before her chair, their faces painted with orange firelight, waiting for her to begin. She always started the same way, long ago, before even the hills knew their names. And with those words, the cold outside disappeared. She told tales of the plague years, but never with fear. In her version, the sickness was a shadow that had lost its way, and the village had hidden under the wing of the earth until it passed. She spoke of the spring as a living spirit, a guardian that whispered to the hills and told them to close their doors. The children listened, their eyes wide, believing every word. To them, their survival was not just luck, it was a secret kindness from the land itself. Even the adults, who knew the truth was simpler, found comfort in the story. It made the valley feel alive, not just a place, but a friend. Others would take turns telling smaller stories of lost travelers who followed lanterns through the fog, of stars that guided farmers home, of wolves that guarded lonely roads. None of the stories were frightening. They were slow, dreamy, and filled with quiet wonder. They were not meant to keep people awake, but to lead them gently toward sleep. By the time the last tale ended, the children were already dozing against their mother's arms, and even the men stared into the fire with half-closed eyes, their thoughts drifting like ash through the warm air. The nights were long, but they were never empty. Some evenings, the blacksmith would hum a low tune, deep and steady, a rhythm that matched the crackle of the fire. The baker would join softly, and soon the whole room would be filled with sound. Not quite a song, but something between a sigh and a prayer. Outside, the snow fell quietly against the windows, and the wind pressed gently at the doors, as if it, too, wanted to listen. When the flames finally burned low, and the last ember pulsed faintly in the dark, the people would whisper their good nights and climb into bed. The world outside was frozen, silent, endless, but inside, the air was warm with breath and memory. The snow would keep falling, the stars would keep shining, and the village would keep dreaming. For in that winter, stories were not just entertainment, they were survival. They reminded the people that they were part of something larger and older than fear. They reminded them that peace was not a miracle, but a story they had written together, night after quiet night, in the glow of the firelight. By the middle of January, the snow lay thick enough to swallow the sound of footsteps. The world had become a painting of white and blue, the roofs smooth and curved, the trees bare and black against the pale sky. When the wind rose, it carried a whisper that seemed to come from the hills themselves, a voice both distant and kind. Inside the valley, the villagers went about their days with slow, practiced grace. There was no hurry. Winter asked for patience, and patience they had learned long ago. The mornings were the quietest. A faint silver light crept through the shutters, and the first sounds were the gentle stirring of fires, the crackle of kindling, the creak of floorboards, the soft murmur of someone saying a prayer before the day began. Smoke rose lazily into the frozen air, curling like ribbon from every chimney. From above, the village must have looked like a cluster of warm stars, each home glowing softly against the pale earth. The spring at the edge of the valley was nearly frozen now, its surface caught in a fragile shell of ice. Yet beneath it, the water still flowed, unseen but alive. The villagers came to it once a week, breaking the ice carefully with wooden poles to gather water. They worked in silence, breath misting in the cold, the sound of cracking ice echoing through the stillness. Each time the water reappeared, it felt like a small miracle, proof that even in the hardest months, life continued in quiet persistence. One afternoon, a child named Ellen slipped away from her home and wandered toward the hills. She was small and curious, wrapped in wool too big for her boots sinking deep into the snow. When she reached the ridge, she saw the valley stretched below, white, endless, and perfect. The smoke from the cottages drifted upward, and the chapel bell, faint and distant, called softly into the wind. For a long moment, she stood there, her cheeks flushed from the cold, feeling both tiny and infinite at once. She didn't know it, but she was standing in the same place where her grandmother once prayed during the plague years. The land remembered, even if the people no longer did, as the sun began to fall. Ellen returned home, her footprints the only marks on the untouched snow. Her mother met her at the door, worried but smiling, wrapping her in a blanket. The warmth of the fire melted the frost from her hair, and soon the smell of soup filled the room. They ate slowly, as always, saying little. The quiet between them was not empty, but full of safety, of knowing, of the small, steady love that had carried them through every storm that night. The villagers gathered again at the chapel. They brought candles, not for prayer, but for light. Each flame reflected in the frosted windows, turning the snow outside to gold. The priest spoke softly about the turning of seasons, about how even the longest winters must eventually break. The people listened, their faces calm and thoughtful. They knew that beyond the snow, spring waited. It always did. The world, like the water beneath the ice, never truly stopped. The stars shone so brightly that the snow seemed to glow from within. The sound of their footsteps was soft, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. The fires burned low, the night deepened, and the valley, still, silent, eternal, held them gently, as if dreaming them into another dawn.